morning, guys. Good morning, friends. I just made my lovely cup of brew. Isn't it pretty? I still don't have the latte art down. That's something that eventually I want to learn how to do. But I will tell you that espresso machine was the best thing my husband ever did. I use this thing every single morning, and now he'll go to make me a cup of pour over, and I'm like, oh, I'll just make myself a latte. I'm headed out into the greenhouse. Today I'm starting my hardening off process. Whew. That took skill. So today I'm starting my hardening off process. Hey Simba, hey Lily. Lily, get out. So in years past, I was starting all my seeds in my greenhouse that's back in the corner. And that greenhouse does not get really good sun. It was really small, so I had a hard time keeping the heater in there, which I needed to do because it still wasn't staying warm enough at night, and bringing a fan in. And so I had my father-in-law build me hardening off tables. I'm going to take you guys over to that part of the farm in a second and show that to you, because I use these tables for a lot. I actually ended up putting one in the garden for when I harvest and have to rinse off stuff. But hardening off table made my life a lot easier. But in here, I'm hardening off a bit differently. And so I wanted to just kind of show you guys what I'm doing now with this greenhouse, and then what I did with the other greenhouse, because that is probably what you would need to do if you had a greenhouse that was really like kind of staying shaded, wasn't getting that optimal sun. Maybe you were growing all your things inside under grow lights. You definitely want to make sure you are conditioning them properly to the elements outside. So this whole week it is supposed to be high 70s. The low is 50. Last night it actually dipped down to 48. So I came out here yesterday and I actually turned my heater off, because I know that in a couple weeks when my frost date's over with, we're gonna have nights that get down into the 50s, and so I want them to go ahead and get used to this. So unless we have a crazy freeze where it gets really, really cold, the heater will no longer come on at night. And that is just really kind of conditioning these plants for what's gonna happen outside. So the temperature in here is hotter than the temperature that they're going to be experiencing out there. So as far as moving these outside to get sun exposure, I don't need to do that because of the plastic I have on my greenhouse. It does that mighty fine. So since I won't actually be moving these outside and inside, I'm leaving them in here. The main thing I am doing right now for this particular greenhouse is turning off the heat at night. No heat at night. And I have been running 2 fans. So I've got just an oscillating fan here and an oscillating fan here. And typically what I do is I have one at the front of the greenhouse and one at the back, and they're just kind of rotating air. And one that is for good airflow, as you guys can see here, just the condensation that drips. My plants, they got some water on them, and that is certainly okay. But as you guys can see, I mean, I've got really thick stalked tomatoes, which is really nice. That's really what you want. But when I keep the door open, and when the wind comes through here, it gets a good front portion of these tables. And same with over here. It's mainly the ones in the back that aren't getting as much wind, like natural wind coming in. So that's why I'm just adding the fan to kind of circulate that. And essentially what I'm trying to do is just get them sturdy, get them conditioned. You know, when you think about starting a plant inside under a grow light, maybe you're a beginner gardener, this is your first time growing food. First of all, I'm proud of you. A little side note, if you're growing food, yes, it makes me so happy. But say that you are just working with, you know, racks, some sort of rack and grow lights in your house. That is completely fine. However, the UVs in this, or maybe if it's an LED light that they're using, is totally different than the actual sun. So what you might experience is you've got this in your house with all your artificial lighting. Your plants are doing okay, but then when you move them outside, they experience sun scald because they're taking a direct hit from the actual sun, which can be really harsh. Maybe you haven't had a fan on them, and so you go out there and you have a windstorm, and you know, your plants, let me try to find a baby one here. Maybe your seedlings just have really thin stems just because they weren't established and conditioned correctly. And when you take them outside, I've done this so many times in years past, so I'm telling you this out of my own error before, and they've just snapped in half. I've taken plants to the plant sale, they weren't sturdy enough, wind came, snapped in half. Obviously, you've worked so hard starting these seeds. You've been babying them for months and months. You want to have a successful transition out into the garden. And so the best way you can do this is mimic the outdoors wherever you're at. So right now for me, heater's off, fans are on. That's it. Because it is getting so much direct sunlight in here, I think that these are fine. This would be hardened off for me. Plenty of wind, sturdy plants, we're fine. Now in the years past, I would have cringed at the thought of doing this. I would have thought, oh no, they are not conditioned right, this is not okay. Now I have talked to my friend Sean who built my tunnel. This is what he does, this is what he recommended. We talked through it. I feel good about, you know, all my starts going out into the world and into people's gardens and being just fine. But in my other greenhouse, this could have never happened. And that is because the greenhouse I was working with did not mimic the outdoor conditions at all, particularly when it came to the sun. Sun can be super, super harsh. You can easily kill your plants from sun scald. Transplant shock is a thing too. So if you have them in this lovely little cozy environment, and you move them outside and they're not conditioned, they're going to take some sort of shock to that. Now it'll be no surprise to you guys that I am talking about plants in comparison to my body. Say I come outside after I've been cozy in the house by a fire all winter and it's an 80-degree day, I come outside in a tank top, no sunscreen, no sun hat. What happens? My body experiences shock. I burn. It is painful. I'm going to have some repercussions for that choice that I made to go outside without sunscreen and, you know, having conditioned my body correctly. Same thing for your plants. They've been in this warm, cozy, you know, controlled environment. If you move them outside and you haven't done the right steps, they're going to experience some shock. And now obviously I can bounce back pretty quickly, right? Some aloe vera, there's some things I can do. Maybe your plant wasn't established enough. Maybe you had a smaller start that you moved out into the garden. It more than likely is going to die. I've got these cute little basils that I had extra. So if I were to have taken this and transplanted this out into the garden, this wee little guy, and he wasn't conditioned and hardened off right, he's just gonna shrivel up and die. I mean, that's exactly what's gonna happen. He's not established enough. He wasn't conditioned. More than likely, this little guy's not gonna make it. And so I think about those things when I think about selling a product. I hit on that in yesterday's video, you know, wanting to make sure I'm giving a good product that they can put into their garden and it's immediately going to thrive. But it's also necessary just for your plant life, you know, to make sure that you haven't wasted your time, that you're able to actually put that, you know, into the garden and it's going to produce food for your family. That's obviously really, really important. I'm gonna walk you guys over to my hardening off tables. I'm gonna show you what they look like and then tell you guys what I have done in years past, which is what I would recommend if, like I said, you're growing in a grow light indoors, or maybe you have a greenhouse that's shaded and you can just tell. You should be able to look at your plants and tell if they're thriving or not, be able to tell, okay, this can withstand some damage or not. It's also important too when you put your plants outside. So, you know, our last frost date is about 2 weeks away, I believe. And so I am not going to come outside in the hottest part of the day and plant my plants. You know, we're uppers of 80 here now is what it's gonna be moving forward. I've looked at the 10-day forecast, that's what it looks like. So it's not gonna be beneficial or smart to my plants to put them outside when it's super, super hot like that. So I'm gonna wait. Typically I wait until later in the evening, which is really hard, I know, because I get up and the first thing I wanna do is go plant my plants. But I wait until later in the evening. That way they've had all afternoon, all night with just the low shade. And then the next morning they've got all morning with the sunrise, and it's not until about 11 o'clock that it starts getting really hot in my garden, having that real direct sun. And I have found that it just works best for my plants. So I would encourage you guys, while you're thinking about hardening off, also think about when you are going to be planting your things outside. Try to make that earlier in the morning, later in the evening, depending on, you know, your sun conditions and things like that. All right, let's make way into my old greenhouse. Oh wow, I haven't been out here in so long. It's now a storage house, that's okay. So when I was growing my food out here, you guys can see it's a lot shadier than the other one. there's also all trees. It's just wooded. Very little. I'm only getting light from the left side over here. And so what I would do is at the end of the day, and usually this process for me was 7 days long. You can do it less, you can do it more. I would encourage you guys to figure out what your plants look like. If your plants are super puny and they are just not looking really good, they're just so they're like thin stemmed, maybe kind of leggy, they're probably going to need to be conditioned longer than just a few days. Now if you've got pretty established starts, you're just needing them maybe to have that direct sunlight, maybe some actual wind, things like that, you may only have to do this process for 3 to 4 days. For me, a good rule of thumb was I do this 7 days. And so for me, that was, you know, at least I gave me that clearance before the plant sale, that way that they were good and conditioned and hardened off before I sold them. Maybe if I was growing them for my garden, you obviously want to do this before you plan on putting them out into the garden. Even with hardening off properly, there are still some chances that your start is going to experience some sort of shock in the transition, and that's okay. It may just be, you know, not as harsh. It may not actually kill it, but it may still have a few wilted leaves, and you know, it may still get a little bit of sun scald on it. Your plant can bounce back from those things 100%. Just make sure that you're feeding the soil really well. Make sure you're just looking at those cues and maybe, you know, attending to those. If they look really droopy, give them an extra drink of water, and you know, just try to be mindful of that and cater to it. But what I did 7 days before I got to put them out in my garden or got ready to sell them, in the afternoon I would take my plants that were filled up, everything you see here, I had plants everywhere. I would take these and I would move them outside in the evening shade. A little bit of sun, but it's not harsh. It's like when there's just a little bit of sun left. I'd move them outside for 20 minutes and I'd bring them back in. And the next night I would move them outside for 20 minutes and I'd bring them back in. Then on the third night, I would move them outside for 30 minutes earlier in the afternoon, where they're, you know, it's not as shaded. That sun's a little bit hotter at that point. And I would continue to do this method. And what it is, you're not wanting to put them out there at the harshest part of the day. You're not wanting to put them out there in direct sun. Absolutely not. You're going to gradually do this. And what that looked like is me, you know, setting them outside. That looked like, and it was a lot. I mean, when you're thinking about hauling all the plants from in here to out there, that is crazy, okay? It truly is. That is where the hardening off table came into place, and I will tell you guys all about that in a second. And so you're gonna keep moving them, and what I would do is I would end up moving them, which is why I have a hardening off table in the garden as well. Because over here, this part of our yard, it just gets shaded. You get that afternoon sun, but it's definitely not like a hot sun or anything like that. And then by day 4 or 5, I'm moving them out into the garden on the hardening off table there. That way they've got more direct sun for longer, and that is what I'm doing. I'm just continuing to bring them outside, starting with shade, starting with a small amount. I mean, it could even be 5 or 10 minutes, whatever you have. That is fine. But just make sure that you increase the time and you transition from the shady part of the yard to maybe partial sun, and then eventually you want them to be able to stay outside all day long and just be just fine by the time you get ready to put them in your garden or sell them. You want your plants to have been outside all day long, in full sun, partial sun, all these things before you put them into your garden or sell them, because you just want to make sure that your plant, you know, is conditioned to that, hardened off to that well. And so it really is that simple. You're just slowly transitioning your plants to the elements outside. They're getting the actual wind, which is different. You know, we can go through and we can run our fingers through the ceilings. We could add a fan. But where I am, I have straight line winds anytime a storm comes. My plants need to be conditioned to that, you know, and so getting the actual wind, it is just different. And so I encourage you guys, start thinking about this process. If you didn't even know this was a thing, definitely do this, because I would hate for you to have spent so much time working on your plants, starting your plants, doing this, and then missing this really crucial step and putting them out into your garden and then it not be a successful year for you. Now, I realized real quickly that moving all of my plants, last year I had thousands of plants, moving them inside outside so many times, you know, when you move them all outside, your 20 minutes would be up and I'd have to start bringing the first set back in here. That ate up a lot of my time, and if I'm being completely frank with you guys, it was really annoying. You know, I've got kids and littles, and that just seemed like a complete and total waste of my time. So I had my father-in-law build me these hardening off tables. I'll show you what they are. I have no idea how he built these. A farmer friend of mine, she had some, and I took a picture, and he did it. It obviously looks like it's made out of 2x4s. We've got a hog panel on the top, really, really sturdy. And so I would come out here and I would lay all of my starts on here. Now you can see I have attached these PVC pipes with these brackets. And the reason why I added these is because when we were like down in the 48 like last night, or 50s, I thought, I'm not bringing these back in here. I can leave them right here and just throw a sheet of plastic on here, some sort of row cover. And I did that, and I just took little clamps that I bought at Lowe's, and I clamped the plastic to the PVC pipe, and I clamped the plastic to the wood. And I can tell you right now, this right here was worth its weight in gold. I absolutely love these. They're so sturdy. They work so well. And then you're able to just keep it out there. Say maybe, you know, you're starting with a small space inside under grow lights. And when you're potting, you know, when you're starting seeds in 128 cell tray, 72, 50, whatever, it doesn't seem that big a deal. But when you go to start potting them up, you know, that doubles, that triples, right? And you maybe run out of space. This is a really good option if you don't have space, but you're where your temperatures are good enough to where they can stay outside and just be under some sort of frost protection. I never had any problem with this at all. Also, you're still getting the movement and the wind. And so I just found that it works really, really well. I also have one in the garden, which now that I'm not hardening off my plants that way, I use these primarily to put all my vegetables on. So when I harvest, say maybe I harvest a bunch of beets or turnips, I'm putting them on here, I'm spraying them off. It's just like a really good utility table that I use in the garden, which I really like, that it's versatile. Right now it's got a lot of stuff on it. So I just took off my hoops from the garden when I was cleaning them out. You guys can see right now it's just kind of a project table, but it does work really, really well just to be able to put produce on here. Especially if I'm harvesting like tomatoes for a restaurant, I can put like crates on here, and I can put, you know, who these go to, and just kind of easily harvest and like set up my orders accordingly. And I just really like having those tables. They're honestly really pretty inexpensive to build too. I want to say maybe a couple $100, and they were both built. And so I really liked that. My plan was, when I thought I was still gonna have to harden off the way I had in the past, I was just gonna bring the one table from the garden and stick right here, and it would have been fine. But I just didn't really feel the need to have to do that. And then after getting confirmation from my friend, I was like, I think we're okay. But it really is that simple. It really can be that simple, but it really does make that big of a difference, and really is that important. One more point that I wanted to hit on, if you transition your things outside, and you know, another thing that I think is really important to think about is, you know, maybe on a light rainy day, I'll move these outside, because none of mine have been exposed to that rain, and that's actually really crucial. I mean, it is the springtime. Depending on where you live, it rains a lot here, and so I can condition these, but they need to be conditioned and used to some sort of rainfall. So if it's a light rain, I may move some of them outside on a table, just get them used to that. I have also been watering overhead, which I know a lot of people will say, no, don't do that. But I've been doing that for the simple fact to try to get them conditioned to something overhead. Now I do have the fans on here, so I'm not worried about, like, they'll dry out pretty quickly because of all the airflow that I have going on. But when you move them outside, you know, if they're going to experience some sort of transplant shock, it's going to be from the sun exposure being too hot, it's going to be from the wind and they're just not a sturdy enough plant that it ends up breaking them, or a lot of times it'll be from the rainfall. Now sometimes, oftentimes, your plants will recover from those things. So I can put my sunflower outside, maybe it didn't get super conditioned to the sun, and it, you know, ends up burning, having a sun scald. It can recover from that. More than likely, like I said, it will completely recover from that. But what will happen is it will stunt its growth, and it will stunt its production, because it has went through that shock. There was one year when we actually bought our house and we're moving in here, I was just, you know, determined I was not going to go a year without gardening. We moved in June, so I planted my entire garden at our previous house in 5-gallon buckets. Everything. I mean, squash, zucchini, cucumbers, tomatoes, like you name it. I had an entire moving truck full of my plants and it was kind of crazy. And so when we got here, my things were drying out quite a bit because they were in that plastic totes and they weren't really thriving. And so I thought, well, you know what, after we built the garden, I was just going to move them into the soil. Now, I knew that I could do this, but I also knew because this plant, you know, was used to the condition that it was in, it was going to experience some sort of shock. So I knew that it would probably produce tomatoes or, you know, squash or zucchini, but I took into consideration that it was probably going to be shocked and it was probably going to stunt that plant to some degree, and that is exactly what happened. Those tomatoes that year did not produce near as quickly as they do in years past, and it's just because I shocked their systems. You know, I shocked all their root systems. I shocked everything about that plant, and it just took a little bit longer to rebuild and start driving its energy where it needed to go to produce fruit, instead of trying to reestablish all those root growth and things like that. So just be mindful of that. If you are putting your things outside and they do experience sun shock, don't pull them up. Don't, unless it's just shriveled up and die, leave it there. You know, plants are super resilient. More than likely it will bounce back. It may be stunted, it may not put off as much fruit, it may take longer to put off fruit. That is okay, but just know that's probably why, because had I not realized that transplant shock was a thing, I would have probably taken that variety from that 5-gallon bucket, put it in my garden, seen that it took forever to produce, it didn't really produce that well, and I could have made a assessment that that was just not a high producer, you know, tomato, and not grow that anymore. But since I knew these things and I knew that I had shocked it, I thought, oh, I'll just try again next year. You know, I was turning my lemons into lemonade, right? Like I was working with what I had, but it also, I kind of knew what to expect and I knew what was going on. So just be mindful of that, but do know it is an important step. Figure out what's going to work best for you. Obviously, you don't want to be spending hours a day moving plants from a greenhouse or in your house to outside. So maybe just some sort of hardening off table. I did that. I did the tables I did because I get so much use out of it. And I have a lot of them. You could very easily bring some sort of card table outside and rig up some sort of just like hoop to where when you lay some plastic on it or frost protection fabric, that it's not laying directly on your starts. Now, I showed you what works best for me. That was good money spent on my end because I use those tables so much. But you do not have to go that fancy at all. You can find really anything. I mean, you could use anything to replicate that and make that work for whatever's going to work within your budget or, you know, what you have available. So I hope it kind of encourages you guys. It can be that simple. Gradually take your plants out, bring them back in, repeat the process, make sure that they're outside longer and are experiencing more sun. And by the end of it, figure out how many days work for you. Take cues from your plants. And also, I just hope that you guys have a great, successful gardening year. If this is your first time starting your own plants, like I really just want to tell you guys, I am so proud of you. I know it can be intimidating, but my gosh, it is so stinking rewarding. So I hope that your gardens are just lush and full of beauty, and you just have that boost of confidence like, oh yeah, I'm never gonna go a year without starting my own seeds again. But I hope this video was helpful. I'll talk to y'all soon.